When you think of North and South, what comes to mind?
All the pageantry of uh, a huge production. Um, those kind of things don't come around that often. And the scope of the storytelling was huge. And it was a real moment in popular culture at that time. Um, at that time, there were only three broadcast networks in America. The audiences were enormous. Um, and there was, when a miniseries like this came on, everybody knew about it. It was a big deal. It was the beginning of the fall season, the new season for television and other entertainment. And there was a tremendous promotional support behind it, and it was just a huge event. And we knew that going into it. We knew it was going to be a big story told in a very grand way. So there was just a buzz about it from the very start.
Can you remember sort of getting the part and how that came about?
Well, oddly enough, I was in London shooting location work on a miniseries or TV film that I did called Lace 2 with Phoebe Cates and Brooke Adams. And it was just before the holidays, the Christmas holidays. And I'd been on location for 6 weeks or so, was really looking forward to going back to spend the holidays with my family in upstate New York. And I got a call from my agent saying they'd like me to come back to LA before the holidays and meet on this project. And I was initially annoyed because it meant I'd have to fly from England to LA, perhaps less than 24 hours, and get on a plane again and race back to the East Coast to be there in time for the holidays. Um, but fortunately, my agent talked some sense into me, and I made the meeting, and that was my audition. And shortly thereafter, I found out I had the part.
And as you mentioned, obviously a huge production. I think I'm right in saying it took around sort of 2 years to make thousands of extras, thousands of costumes, established names, guest stars. And you mentioned that it did feel, like a big deal at the time. So, um, you know, obviously you knew you were kind of a part of something that was very special.
Yeah. I'd only been in Hollywood for about 3 years before. And um, so this was happened relatively quickly for me in my career. I had started out in theater and spent 3 years doing regional theater, and I came to LA and then was on Remington Steele for the first season that show was on, and then did a series of guest stars and small parts and feature films and so forth. And then this came along pretty quickly, and again, I just knew that the scope of the thing was going to make it a very big deal.
Of course. And how aware were you of the books going into it?
I wasn't aware of them at all. It's just something that didn't cross my radar. I was from the time I was a small child, I was a huge Civil War fan or buff. I was very interested in it, and as a young child, I had the Union hat and I had a toy musket and little play figures to recreate battles with. So it was tapping into that excitement that I had as a child was really fun as well. But there was something um, I knew a little bit about the Civil War, not a lot, but I immediately began doing research as soon as I got the role. And it was so great shooting in the South, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and in Charleston, South Carolina, because that's where it all happened. When we were in Vicksburg, I went to the battlefield and found a marker showing my great uncle's name, and the marker was within 20 feet of where he fell, where he was killed in action at that point. And I wasn't aware of any of this before I had started the production. Then I started hearing from relatives, distant relatives who had heard I had this job, and it was sent all kinds of ancestral information, and was really touched and moved that I was able to find his memorial and recreate that experience.
And how did you sort of land on sort of playing the part of George? Because I think one of the character strengths is kind of seeing the good in everyone. So did you sort of bring a bit of yourself to that? I mean, sort of, how did you go about that?
Well, I bring a lot of myself to every role I play. I mean, that's what you have. That's your palette. That's what you have to work with. You have your imagination, and you have your own life experience and the essence of who you are. It's all a matter of it's a matter of balance, um, bringing out certain aspects of your character that may not be as prominent in your own daily life as a character's as it is in the character. But that's all really, in my view, that's all an actor has to work with is your sense of self and your imagination. I think the roles were very well cast. I mean, my persona is, I'm sure they felt was quite similar to what they were looking for in George. And that's the trick of casting anyway. Just like Patrick was the essence of Ori Main, I think there are many. I mean, just sitting and talking with me or with him, you would identify certain aspects of each of those characters as they were revealed in the book and in the script. And I think that's the key to good casting. I don't spend a lot of time, creating a character or a background to a character that doesn't exist outside of the page. So it's all about each individual scene, what the intention of the scene is, how that scene fits into the overarching arc of the film itself and the story that's being told, and go from there.
There's a bit of sort of internet trivia, and I'm sure you'll tell me if it's true or not. But to prepare for the role of George Hazard, you spent several weeks at Patrick Swayze's horse ranch, where you were sort of taught how to ride. Is there any truth in that, or is that just internet chatter?
No, there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I wasn't at his ranch at the time. I lived in LA. We were, lived 10 miles apart or so. Excuse me. And I had had a little experience on horseback, but not much. And Patrick had a small ranch on the outskirts of LA, and he was a big horseman, and he had, I don't know, two or three horses. And after we met, or yeah, we met the first time, uh, he invited me out to the ranch, and not necessarily to learn to ride, but just to hang out. We both knew that the the relationship between George and Ori is the foundation of the film, and it was really important to show the um, intimate nature, really, of this friendship and how close they were. And we both knew instinctively it would be only to our benefit to establish that with each other and bring that to the storytelling. And so, yeah, I went out to the ranch, I don't know, probably certainly less than half a dozen times. And usually Lisa, his wife, would join us. We go out. There were trails adjacent to his ranch out in the Hanson Dam Recreation Area in northern LA. And we just go for the just talk, just shoot the shit and get a sense of each other and create, start to create the foundations for this extraordinary friendship that was so essential to the story.
I remember sort of having previously spoken to uh, Philip Kasnoff. He said that a lot of the actors, I think, as you said as well, sort of some of which were New York based, kind of said they could ride, and they got there, and of course they couldn't ride a horse, and production had to shut down for a couple of days, and then there was sort of a riding school. I'm guessing you were okay by that point because you'd obviously had the practice beforehand.
Well, I do recall spending a little time with the Wranglers, maybe initially to familiarize myself, and I had custom boots made, and then yeah, spending a number of visits with Patrick, and just really getting out and doing a hard gallop. I mean, that's the trick. That to do that and to look comfortable doing it, look like you've grown up doing it. So it was just a matter of repetition and getting over the fear factor, which was a real thing. Um, but yeah, the more comfortable I knew that I would feel on horse, the better it was for the film as well.
And you touched on it a minute ago, but I guess what was it like um, working with Patrick? Because as the audience, you have a lot of you can see there's a lot of chemistry, and it's believable that these guys would be best friends, would go through what they go through, despite their differences as well, and really have that strong bond. So I suppose as you're saying, I guess it helps that you'd spent that time together beforehand, and then that could kind of translate on screen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick was a very open and accessible guy emotionally, and I mean that shows in his work. He had easy access to a deep reservoir of emotion, and I found him to be very charming. And we were completely different. I mean, completely different backgrounds, and I think our approach to work is different, techniques different. But I really loved him and just enjoyed the hell out of him. He was a really accessible and generous person, and it was really easy to develop this bond that carried over, I think, into the work.
And I think I'm right in saying that the series produced a few marriages between the cast and the crew as well. I guess, do you sort of remember meeting sort of Wendy for the first time?
Yeah, first time I met her was at dance rehearsal. There was a big party scene in part one where we're in Mexico, and she her father was played by Robert Mitchum, and he was a surgeon in the army. And so there were a number of traditional folk dances, and we had to rehearse for them. And I was on a sound stage on the Warner Brothers lot, and she came right up and introduced herself to me, and there was an instant connection um, on both sides. And yeah, we started dating shortly thereafter that and began the relationship. And less than 3 years after we got married on camera, we got married in real life. So it's a extraordinary story.
Why not? Yeah.
Another good example of great casting, I must say.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, and do you remember was the series was it shot in continuity? Because I imagine if it wasn't, it must be quite hard to keep track of exactly what's happening where and what's going on.
No, it was shot all out of sequence, as things usually are. It's totally dependent upon your locations. And when you travel the distances that we did, you have to shoot all of those scenes at those locations. And within that, you can't even really work chronologically necessarily because there's so many actors involved and there's so many moving parts and pieces to fit together. So your locations and your actor availability and the sequencing is just dependent on so many different things. So I don't think there was any continuity in terms of the sequence of that the scenes were shot in. Um, and as I recall, kind of the general order was we shot in Los Angeles maybe for a week or two, and then spent the production spent maybe at least a couple of months in Charleston, and then Vicksburg, and then various other shorter periods at various other locations through the South. Camden, Arkansas rings a faint bell, and somewhere in Louisiana, and but yeah, it's all out of sequence. That's normal, and that's one of the challenges of working in the medium. It's just the way it is.
And North and South featured some truly incredible guest stars. And if you don't mind, I'd like to throw a couple of names at you just to get your sort of memories of working with them, even if it was only for a short time. And you mentioned him a second ago, but Robert Mitchum, it must have been pretty special to appear alongside him, one of the Hollywood kind of greats, really.
Yeah, I mean Mitchum, what a legacy. He's one of the original bad boys of Hollywood. I mean, he was smoking weed back in the 50s and went to jail for it, and his career survived somehow. And he's iconic and somebody I always really admired and looked up to. So that was a huge thrill working with him. And not only I had an uncle who was a spitting image for Robert Mitchum as well. So there was this kind of weird overlap there between real life and this imagery that I had in my mind. But
Um,
he's the essence of naturalism in film acting. He does so obviously very little acting. He's totally comfortable in front of the lens, and he's just a really easy persona to hang with. You immediately trust him and adapt his character's vision, no matter who he's playing. And he's not showy, he's not demonstrative, but he has tremendous power and charisma by not apparently doing very much at all. And that's something I really paid attention to and tried to pick up on how he did it. And there is no, so much of it is just innate. It's just the essence of who he is.
so you had quite a few scenes with Hal Holbrook as well, who of course played Lincoln.
Yeah, I mean, Hal Holbrook had won an Emmy, I believe, about 10 years earlier for playing Abraham Lincoln in a miniseries, a TV movie called Lincoln. So he was kind of he's the go-to guy in the culture at that time. I mean, he was Mark Twain and Abraham Lincoln, those two characters for so many people defined him, Hal and his ability. So to be working with him after he'd spent, you know, I mean, I guess nowadays it's far more common to hear about actors who spend 12 hours in a makeup trailer coming out looking like some kind of alien or something, or totally recreating their face. But this was one of the first instances I can remember. First time I ever worked with somebody who did literally spend 5 hours in a makeup chair getting all the prosthetics and everything. And he goes in as Hal and he comes out as Abraham Lincoln. It's astonishing. And it helped me enormously to be working opposite with him because he had such gravitas and such kind of I mean, he basically defined Abraham Lincoln for the modern audience through his uh, portrayal that I mentioned before. So that was just a masterclass in acting every day that we shared the set. It was technically um, um, incredibly informing and educational.
Hmm. I mean, I have to say that was the first time I'd seen sort of Lincoln portrayed on screen, and obviously how Holbrook has this very distinctive voice. And I actually thought it was an imitation. And then when you get to the Spielberg Lincoln film with Daniel Day-Lewis, and you think it doesn't sound right, and of course you realize, oh no, it's he doesn't sound like this. It's
Right.
um,
Yeah, I had the good fortune to play Abraham Lincoln in a play um, in LA, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago. And when I was working on the part, I decided, I had to decide what kind of voice I was going to use. And I went right to North and South. And I was watching all the scenes with Hal, and I just copied as best I could because that defined it for me. That was the kind of gold standard, and I just unabashedly imitated Hal Holbrook on stage as best I could.
and the last name I'll throw at you, I think I'm right in saying you sort of only had maybe the one scene with him, but James Stewart, because that was his last sort of on-screen performance.
That was kind of like a out of body experience. I mean, I'm just standing next to this screen legend and that incredibly distinctive voice and vocal pattern that he has. And I really couldn't take myself out of that moment. I'm saying the lines and I'm doing the work, but the whole time I'm going, this is Jimmy Stewart. This is Jimmy Stewart. I'm in a scene with Jimmy Stewart. Incredible.
And are you sort of still in touch with any of the cast members? Have you crossed paths with anyone outside of North and South? I appreciate you're all, you know, have a lot of acting credits, and I guess it's one of those things where for that period of time you're all together and you go off and do different things. But is it something where you have crossed paths?
I have, yeah. This actor's world is strange. You especially in a project like this, you go away and when you're on location, you just spend almost all your time together, both working and off work hours as well. And you're like a band of gypsies. You have this little traveling family and you have a great commonality of experience. You're all working on the same project together. You're hanging out together because you're away from your home, typical friends and family, and it often becomes quite intense. You get to know people deeply at a very personal level, and then the show's over and people scatter, and some of those people that you become very close with, you never see again the rest of your life. And it's simply the nature of the business. We scatter like wind. People go on to different jobs. They recreate those same familial experiences on new projects, on new sets. And some of those friendships and relationships are designed in their own nature to be only lived for that short period of time. It doesn't lessen the impact that those relationships have on you and your life. But it's an odd thing. I've never gotten really used to it. That being said, I've been able to uh, maintain, continuous relationships. And some people I see periodically, and others just occasionally through the years. I'm still good friends with Bill Ostrander, for instance, Jonathan Frakes and Jeannie um, and other people I've run across through the years. But it's a great experience. Sadly, some were already gone, Kirsty and Patrick and David Carradine, but uh, yeah, great friendships made during that time.
I think we kind of touched on it at the start, but sort of how do you look back on the character of sort of George Hazard? Because obviously, sort of one of the co-leads, not wanting to take anything away from sort of anyone else, but I think I've seen an interview with you previously where you kind of said he's the moral sort of conscience of the story, and perhaps sort of the audience's kind of way into viewing that world.
Yeah, I mean that's inherent in the character. That's that's the purpose of the character. The struggle that George experienced in maintaining that friendship with Ori through the war was the essence of the nation story. The country being torn apart at that time, and the incredibly difficult challenge of maintaining the bonds of family and friendship through that. Um, and I think through George, they presented the moral dilemma inherent in that situation. It was really interesting. A year or two after the show aired here, it aired, it was airing all over the world, but it had aired in Germany. And I was invited to go do some talk shows and some publicity in Germany at the time. And we went to Berlin, which at the time was the wall was still up. And the show was enormously popular in Germany. And I realized at one point the reason might well have to do with the fact that Germany was living that reality of a country torn in two, and it had remained torn in two at that time for 30 years, 40 years almost. And so I think that the story of America's Civil War resonated really deeply with the German population. Um, and it's a anguishing story without a real firm resolution. These are just things that you have to deal with. The country is still dealing with the effects of slavery and the Civil War 150 years later. Um, their wounds not easily healed. And I think that George's humanity tried to shine a light on that and tried to, it was instructive in the need to remain open-hearted and generous and understanding through all the conflict.
And you mentioned earlier, obviously, you've got the family connection, but what was it like to sort of relive the Civil War and reenact those, battles?
Well, there are not many things more thrilling than being on horseback and leading a couple of thousand Civil War reenactors into battle. Because believe me, those reenactors think they're doing the real thing. Those guys are the original method actors. We were so lucky to have the assistance of these people who take this very, very seriously. While I went back to my cushy four-star hotel every night, they stayed in the field and slept in their tents and cooked their meals over campfires and really lived life. And if they, pop a button on the uniform, out comes the whalebone needle and a homespun yarn, and they're mending their button back on. That's the, specificity and the degree of seriousness that they bring to that whole endeavor. And so they have specific characters that each one of them are playing. They really appreciated that the producers of North and South wanted to be as historically accurate as possible in recreating these battle scenes, and they were. So it was just a tremendous thrill to be put in that position and be working with all these terrific reenactors. I'm telling you a story about the reenactors. Um, Maybe in the 20 years later, at least after the show, I was in New Orleans, walking in the French Quarter, and sometimes as an actor who's been in the public eye and used to being recognized, you have a little radar about somebody, who you sense recognizes you, and you don't know if it's going to lead to an encounter or whatever. But my radar sort of told me. I was walking to the French Quarter one night, and the French Quarter is a party scene, and sure enough, this guy is making a beeline toward me and stops in front of me and salutes and says, "General Hazard, it's a pleasure to see you again, sir." So he'd had a little bit to drink, and but he was one of the reenactors who was on the Union side and under my command, and apparently he was an extra in some group scenes we had. But that's kind of an indication of both the commitment those actors had to the show and what it meant to them. And I had got letters for years afterwards, um, and from different reenactors letting me know how significant that was in their experience as and how proud they were to be part of the show, which is, a tremendous testament to the integrity of the storytelling, and made me feel really proud to be part of it.
And obviously, books sort of one and two were released back to back, and it seemed like they were very much of the same sort of block. And of course, book three was released the best part of sort of a decade later. Obviously, some cast members came back, others didn't. Can you remember sort of how that came about? And was it always kind of expected there would then be a book three after the third book came out, or was it kind of a surprise?
Uh, it was a surprise to me. You know, Reconstruction is not a pretty story. I mean, the story kind of naturally ends with the end of the war. That's the story, and I I think personally it was kind of a mistake. I don't think book three stands up to the level that we reached in books one and two, and the a little bit of the air is let out of the balloon, or a lot of the air. Um, and if you look at the kind of the natural arc of storytelling, um, it's like sometimes when you watch a reunion show of maybe your favorite show that was on for 10 years, then 20 years go by and they come by, rarely does that work out, you know. And I had the kind of same sort of feeling here, the same characters, but the whole, Corey's character was not part of book three, so you lose all of that, the foundation of the story really. And like I say, Reconstruction is not a pretty story, and is uh, it was a surprise to me that they came back and did it. But I think it was probably more of a business decision than anything else.
And obviously, next year is the 40th anniversary of um, book one. What do you think is the sort of the legacy of um, North and South, and how do you sort of reflect on it um, all this time later? Because I think it seems like the people that first watch it keep going back to it, and of course now you've got sort of new generations finding it as well.
I don't really know. At the time, I realized that we were probably responsible for all the understanding that many people ever had of what the Civil War was, what it was all about, that our telling history in this entertainment vehicle. I remember meeting a kid maybe 10 years later who said, who recognized me and was asking me about North and South. And he said, we used to watch it in social studies in high school. So they were using North and South as an educational tool to teach the Civil War. Now, I think that's kind of, a little dubious. I mean, it's a great story, but it's not like, there's not a historical document here. It's not, this is an entertainment vehicle above everything else. But there was a sense of that. This is, a tremendous responsibility that goes along with that because you're providing people the information about this, the most important experience we've had as a country. But I don't know how much that's continued. I People tell me all the time it's really hard to find North and South to stream. I don't understand why it's not accessible, readily accessible across streaming platforms like so many shows are. There was a British series that was done 20 years later called North and South, and people are always confused about that because they do a search and they come up with that. Um, so I don't know. I don't know how many people have continued to watch it, through the years, whether it's been passed down or I'm not aware of it. And I don't have any feedback that way, so hard to say. Um, I think it's really hard for young people today to really understand what it was like to only have three over-the-air broadcast networks, and that's where everybody got all of their entertainment viewing. It's inconceivable, really. So, yeah, it's a question I don't have an answer for. I would really like to know myself.